although I don't think there's really that much debate about whether we should do informed consent, I think in terms of the follow-through and the written nature, that's where the debate occurs. What about, is it okay for us to Google clients? Well, Keely and I did a study that we are hoping will come out in Professional Psych maybe in October, but we'll see. They accepted it maybe 6 or 8 months ago, but I'm not sure what the timing is going to be. Where we surveyed psychologists and other professionals about whether they Googled their patients. And almost 50% of our sample of 227 clinicians said they did. What was rather staggering about it was we asked why, and the predominant response is going to sound really familiar to you. They were curious. Not like you. They were curious. We also asked them if they had informed clients ahead of time. Very few informed their clients. Almost, I think none documented that they had done these searches. Mostly it was curiosity. Only about 8% searched in emergency circumstances. You know, there was concern about welfare, client welfare, or somebody hadn't been in touch and they knew they posted on their Facebook page every day and they wanted to see if they were there because they were concerned that they might have harmed themselves. And we looked at, before we did our study, and actually while we were completing our study, there were some others done. In 2010, there were 3 different studies done that ranged from 22 to 27% of the mostly graduate students, clinical psychology graduate students, had searched for their clients' information on the internet. But DeLillo and Gale surveyed almost 154 doctoral students and found that close to 98% had Googled or searched for their clients' personal information. And this raises some really interesting questions. When, why, and what are the potential effects? And the reason I'm raising this in the context of informed consent is that we began to generate some questions here. Okay, so is it okay, as you were raising, Joe, is it okay to do this? And if it is, under what circumstances, right? And then how might we communicate this to patients? So if, in fact, this is a professionally acceptable behavior, then we should be telling our patients about it. And as you see way down here, the second to last bullet point, if it's a professional interaction, am I documenting it? Well, if you don't document it, and you don't tell your client about it, it really raises, right, you're like, am I going to do this? Am I going to document that I did a Facebook search? Yeah, right. We had kind of, I wouldn't quite call it kind of a bimodal, but it was, there were 2 general themes, among others, that emerged. One was folks who felt like that they had crossed a boundary or betrayed their clients by having searched. And very much, Joe, what you were raising about kind of it turning into a hairball, that they started out with maybe it was relatively innocent and just curiosity, and then they'd get information, and sometimes it can be difficult to differentiate what a client tells you from what you learned on the internet. It may, in those circumstances, both be experienced by the clinician and the client as a breach of trust. Further, one of the questions that we came up with was, well, what are our motives? Why am I doing this? What's the point of my getting the information? In your case, it was like, this sounds like it might be plausible. So can I verify this? Okay. And although it may be difficult sometimes to discern, personal curiosity is really different than trying to gather clinical information for a particular purpose. And we were struck by most folks were collecting information because they were cruising around on the internet at night, okay, or in between sessions when they had a client who didn't show up. Do I do it routinely is another question. A professional activity is usually something that is routinized, at least with respect to certain circumstances, right? So is it something I do regularly when these circumstances arise? One of the exceptions I have is a crisis situation. I think that that's, in my view, that's a reasonable basis for searching for information if I believe that there's a crisis. And the other thing is to get contact information that we may have lost or that's changed. Now, Yellow Pages is online. And the way you get people's phone numbers and email addresses and so forth is usually online. I think that that's not an unreasonable thing to do if you don't have contact information for a client. But it makes me wonder, like, that's going to be not very common, is it? I mean, hopefully, a person's going to call me, I'm going to have their phone number. You know, they're going to give me their address so I can send forms or do whatever I need to do. Still, that's not unreasonable. I already mentioned the documentation question. And then the critical component here is, do the clients know I am doing this? And that's partly what distressed Keely and me in this survey and in our reading of this, was that most of the time clients had no idea. Only 8%, or actually it was maybe 20% of our 50%. So 20% did talk about it, but it was a very low number. Most people weren't. And if we're not, why not? You know, so you begin to ask that question, and we got this, as I was starting to say before, this kind of bimodal response. On the one hand, we got people who would say, I felt like I really crossed a boundary. It's not something I would ever do again. There were descriptions in our qualitative aspect of the survey where folks were saying things like, I was embarrassed by my curiosity, and I, very similar to clients being embarrassed. It was fascinating. And also, I realized that I didn't really do this for clinical purposes. I did this more just for personal reasons, and I was kind of more compelled by my countertransference than I was by anything clinical. One person even, talked about the fact that they'd done it once and it was something they would never do again. It's really interesting. On the other hand, there were a group of people, small in this sample, but still a group of people who said, why should there be a problem? It's all public information. And if it's public information and it's out there, then you can get it, and it's perfectly okay. Interesting, that's kind of what some of the clients said as well. Although we had many more clients say, I felt like I crossed a boundary, or what I was doing was kind of creepy, so I stopped. Or if I told my therapist, they would think I was a stalker, but really all I wanted to do was be sure they were there, or see what they were like online or something, okay? But the therapists kind of saying, well, no big deal. I don't know, if you just take what it must be like for somebody who's experienced trauma at the hands of someone who's in authority, parent, okay? Issues of integrity and consistency are really critical. Trust is really critical. You know, seeking safety, that Lisa Javitz's model, is all about the development and maintenance of safety and trust with people with whom we're working. Most all of our therapeutic approaches think of this as kind of one of the cornerstones. Having safety and a sense of control, even if it's about public information. Imagine a traumatized and vulnerable client who finds out, because they happen to put up various bells and whistles to trace you. Not so easy to do yet, but it's possible. I'll tell you a lovely story when we get to confidentiality. And finds out that you've searched, or you let slip some information that you gathered in your search, and they realize, because their PA is almost higher than mine, that they never told you that. My position, Keely's position, I think, and much like your, kind of the supervisor's position is, if we're going to search, we should let people know. If we're going not to search, we should let people know. We should have a policy in place. And for our students and our supervisees, we should have conversations about, particularly as this younger digital generation is developing and maturing, talking about, well, it may have been fine for you to check out everybody or everything online. It's really different with clients, unless you're willing to tell them. And if you're not, then you have to wonder whether your motivations are motivations that are truly clinical, or they're more personal in nature. You collect evidence in that context. But in a standard therapeutic relationship, you're likely not to go look at all the Yelp reviews. Although maybe this will become the standard of care, that before we accept patients, we have to look at their Yelp reviews for previous therapists. There you go. Let me give you an analogy here. Okay? And I'm taking time with this on purpose, because it was striking that it was 50% of our group, and there wasn't an age differential. We thought it would be the younger professionals who were searching more, but it wasn't. It was everybody, or at least, it was evenly distributed age-wise. It really surprised us. And I thought it would be, you know, the 25 and 28-year-olds. These were mostly licensed people. These were mostly licensed people. Imagine that you have your practice here in San Francisco, even though I know some of you have, you know, the breadbasket, maybe in Merced, but just imagine it's in this low-life place. And a client comes into your office, you have a phone contact with him or her, and they come into your office and you meet with him and you do an intake and they do some of your forms, and your impression of them is that this is a reasonably high-functioning person with some significant distress over job environment and impending economic changes for them. It's shaking kind of their emotional foundation. They work maybe as a high-level, you know, law clerk at a big firm in San Francisco. And you think that, you know, the problems that they're coming to you with are things that you can work with and be very helpful. Let's say it's a rainy, these are getting rare, but a rainy day in March in San Francisco. And they get up and leave, and you wait a few heartbeats, and then you put on your raincoat and break out your umbrella, and then you follow them to their workplace because they happen to mention that they're going to be going to the place where they work. And you're doing it to be sure that they are working in the place that they said they were working on their form. So you follow them, and they take the bus, so you too take the bus, and you manage to stay incognito. And then you go to downtown, and sure enough, they're in a building right across from the Transamerica building, you know, multi-story. And you say, oh, okay. And it's got all these law firms on the side. You think it's a good likelihood that they're working at one of these. But you want to be sure. So you watch the elevator they take up and the floor they go to, and then you follow them up. And then you go upstairs and you say to the clerk at the desk, excuse me, but does so-and-so work here? And the clerk says, yes, would you like an appointment? Oh, no, I'll just wait. And then you sit in the waiting room, and you're doing your, you know, Sam Spade gumshoe thing. And so you got a big newspaper in front of you, or an iPad, as the case may be. And the person walks out, doesn't see you. You go, okay, they work here. And then you continue to follow them. And you find out that they go to the Superior Court. And you say, okay, so this is really confirming that they are who they say they are. But while I'm here, since it's a public record, I'm going to go search through the criminal records, DUIs, and divorce records to be sure that they're honest on the forms that they filled out. And darn, they left out their bankruptcy 5 years ago. And they left out the fact that they had been arrested twice for forgery around the same time, but had gotten off. They were not convicted. And you notice that there's this, you know, kind of looked like it was a discharge of the criminal charge with a maybe a community service placement, but it's not clear. And they had a mortgage now, again, and you knew where they lived. And you want to be sure where they live because maybe they've moved. You know, people move around. You notice they're divorced too, by the way. They didn't tell you that. So you wait until they get done with their business at Superior Court. You get on the bus with them again, and you follow them, and sure enough, they go to the exact same address that they put in the form. And now you are satisfied that the person is who they think they are, and who you think they are, more importantly. I don't see the difference between that and doing an online search with two exceptions. The online search is anonymous, so your client will never know, and it's immensely more efficient. So what we could consider is that it is a stalking analogy without ever getting caught. That's what makes this so troubling. If I'm not telling the person, and there isn't a legitimate clinical reason, I couldn't agree with your supervisor more for the reasons that we're talking about. Emergencies are a different issue. And I also think if you want to search, so for example, if you're consulting in an inpatient unit, I would say to folks, well, look, let's go online. Let's check. It's right in front of them. It's right out there. There's no deception. There's no sense that we're just going to gather information without telling anybody. Okay? And it could be really helpful. I have nothing, I'm not against, when I'm saying this, by the way, clients who say, take a look at this, you know, this texting sequence and what this nasty person said to me, or would you come on, would you go on my Facebook page? Well, what I would do is say, sure, let's do it together in session. Take a look at it in session, because it's grist for the mill. But it's about letting people know and having a policy about whether you search for them. Now, the issue that you raised actually came up when I was presenting in an inpatient unit, where a few people said they think it's their duty to actually try to track this down. And that with some folks, they would find that the stories that seemed completely unrealistic were in fact true, or pretty close to true. I still have questions if that happens without informing the clients. Because all you need to do is get that information when other people don't, and the client knows that you searched for them. And then while younger clients, some of them may feel comfortable, there's an odd expectation that even though we are in, as Phil Cushman calls it, we're in a world where everybody wants to be a minor celebrity on the internet. Folks still have a belief that what they post is theirs. And so I believe we should be respecting that and not stalking them. Think about if you start to have the urge that you're putting on your raincoat and getting out your umbrella. Okay? And part of what's so tricky is that the internet is built on a point and click, reinforcing us for clicking and following. And same for clients. So this raises, I think, a useful kind of approach to go back to managing things like Yelp reviews, okay? Or managing things like clients wanting us to friend them on the internet, you know, on Facebook, or are searching them. Keely has come up with a really nice, what she calls social media policy. And the suggestion here is that as part of our consent or office policies, we talk about with clients how we're going to interact in this new digital world. Because it's there. We can't ignore it. And we get to choose. I actually don't think it is fundamentally unethical to search for clients on the internet if we get their permission. To me, that's not necessarily a problem. I'm going to refrain from doing it in part because I want the client to initiate it. If I'm doing child custody evaluations, though, I'm going to have it as part of my informed consent that I will search the internet for information. Sometimes you get confirmatory information about domestic violence or about a person's representations of themselves or their misrepresentations. And by the way, just to remind you, not everything you read on the net is true. So one of the other part that is more the practical dimension of going online is don't trust everything you read. In fact, a good, maybe even a whole canister of salt is a really good idea. Notice, and I pointed this out on purpose to set the stage for this conversation now. Notice when I pointed out that the second or third listing when I did my first search was inaccurate. And that wasn't even intentional. People can set up completely spoofed, completely false Facebook pages for other people. They can hack in, they can post, and it happens a lot. Family court, I'm aware that it's something that happens all the time. So one has to be really careful. There's an organization called Without My Consent that Keely and I are both on their advisory board, where they've been working to develop those kinds of legislative responses and to create avenues through which people can get redress when they have revenge porn posted. Invasion of privacy suits can work, but having legislation actually really helps. Okay, so yeah, and those kinds of things are done often in the family court context in order to set up the partner or the ex-partner and position yourself better. In those 10% of cases where they're high conflict and people are just going to keep going until, it's often nuclear. Let me show you what Keely includes, just so that you can see the content. And it's online. It's easily accessible. If you acknowledge if you acknowledge her authorship, she's more than happy to have you go ahead and use it. So this is probably not viewable from where you're sitting, but I'll just go over a little bit of what she said. So she starts out with, these are my policies about social media. Please read it to understand how I conduct myself on the internet as a mental health professional. if you have any questions. Then she starts with friending. And she says, I don't accept friend or contact requests from current or former clients on any social networking site. I believe that adding clients as friends or contacts on these sites may compromise your confidentiality and our respective privacy. It may also blur the boundaries of our therapeutic relationship. And then fanning, which is when you're, actually she deleted her Facebook page, so she no longer has a fan, but this is still, for folks who do have Facebook pages, you're welcome to view and read it and share articles and posts, but I do not accept clients as fans on this page because it could compromise the person, as well as I can't, she says that the APA ethics code says I can't solicit testimonials. So she's explaining to folks in this social media policy why. And I think that's really important because often, particularly with digital natives, kids who've grown up with the internet throughout their whole lives, it's really mysterious to them why it is we're saying we won't interact with them on the internet, why we won't follow them on a blog, for example, or a Twitter stream. She says things like, please don't use mobile phone text messaging with me because it's so not private. And I will not use it is not a regular part of my practice to search for clients on Google or Facebook or other search engines. Extremely rare exceptions may be made during a crisis. I do not currently follow current or former clients on Google Reader. And then she has a lovely business review site policy. This is Yelp, where she says, you may find my practice on sites like Yelp. She doesn't necessarily post it there. Somebody else may post it because they're going to review. Just like in Europe, you didn't go on to Yelp and say, I want to be on Yelp. Okay? Health grades. Somebody mentioned health grades in here before. Yahoo Local, Bing, and so forth. Some of these sites include forums in which users rate their providers and add reviews. Many sites comb search engines for business listings and automatically add listings regardless of whether the business has added itself. It's remarkable how few clients, even if they're sophisticated, know that these are automatically generated. These are not things often that people do purposefully. If you should find my listing, please know that my listing is not a request for a testimonial. She talks then again about testimonials and ethics under Principle 5.05. Then she says, of course, you have a right to express yourself on any site you wish. But due to confidentiality, I cannot respond to any review on any of these sites, whether positive or negative. I urge you to take your own privacy as seriously as I take my commitment of your confidentiality to you. You should also be aware that if you're using these sites to communicate indirectly with me about your feelings, there's a good possibility I may never see it. Right. If we're working together, I hope you'll bring your feelings and reactions to our work directly into the therapy process. Notice what she's doing. She's taking this event that occurs in the real world, and she said, let's bring it into therapy. Let's talk about it. A very nice approach, in my view. Now, it will not control everybody. The person you're talking about, it wouldn't work with. Okay? He had ejected it from therapy. But you can see how this contextualizes Yelp. Okay? She talks about, this can be an important part of therapy. Even if you decide we're not a good fit, none of this is meant to keep you from sharing that you are in therapy with me wherever and with whomever you like. Confidentiality means I can't tell. But you are more than welcome to tell anyone you wish I'm your therapist or how you feel about treatment. And then she goes into saying, if you have a complaint, here's who you can send it to. So, by the way, Section 2936 of the Business and Professions Code requires psychologists to post the information about where complaints can be made. So this is nothing new. This is actually compliance with that as well.
And any facilities. Facilities also.
That's right, yeah. And then she talks about location-based services, such as things like, gee, you should probably shut it off when you come into my office. Well, I email you. Conclusion. The idea here is that these are now all realities, and rather than assuming we'll kind of limp along without, there are a number of risky things. What I like about how Keeley addresses it is saying, here's why I don't friend or fan. It's part of my policy. And she has it on her website. So it does this piece of, she's kind of giving people information, she has a blog, and then she's letting clinicians as well as clients know this is the policy that she uses. Okay? So I really think it's a good idea.